You're listening or watching the Stop the Mind Screw podcast. I'm your host, Kathie Owen, certified fitness trainer and life coach since 2002, teaching others the Stop the Mind Screw process. Today, we're discussing the levels of consciousness from the book Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. We are going to talk about how this relates to fitness. Then we're going to talk about the different levels, the force levels, then we'll go into the power levels, and then we'll do a review with reality transurfing terms and stop the mind screw process. You may be thinking, how does this relate to fitness and life coaching? Well, I have your answer. The title of the levels is Power versus Force. Because power is effortless, it goes unseen and unsuspected. Force, on the other hand, is experiences through the five senses. Power can be recognized only through inner awareness. Facts are accumulated by effort, but truth reveals itself effortlessly. As a fitness trainer and a life coach, if I can get my clients, my friends, my colleagues to create a habit, my job is 99% done. This is not done through force, but through power. One of my most polarizing topics is toxic positivity, and I do not agree with this term. I think it is actually forced positivity, but it comes from these levels of consciousness. Notice power versus force. I read this book in 2007 as I started my journey on awakening. And I heard about the book for the first time from Dr. Wayne Dyer in one of his many books. And I was like, I think I'm going to read that. In the book, it even says becoming aware of these different levels is all it takes to wake up or to become more aware. And I actually take it for granted that I have read this and I do know this, and not everyone knows these different levels and what they do to your mindset. All levels that are energy below 200 are in force and destructive in nature, or basically falsehood. All levels above 200 are in power and constructive, truth in nature. A person may operate on one level in a given area of life and another level in another area of their life. Okay, so before we get into the different levels, let's talk about the mind map. You can download a copy of the mind map that is associated with this episode, which helps you understand what I'm talking about. Maybe you can go back to it, take notes, and look at this. And I do mind maps. My teacher is Joseph Rodriguez, and he teaches everything from a mind map. And he's the one that I learned how to do this from. Our brains operate on these different levels, and it's much easier to look at when I'm doing the video. You can sit here and watch what I'm talking about and the different levels that it goes with. You can also refer back to this when you want to take notes or you want to remember something from the episode. You can download your mind map for all of my episodes at www.kathieowen.com/mindmap. Link will be in the description and the show notes. So we're going to talk about the force levels. And as you already know, these are lower levels of consciousness, or we're working with force. Shame is at the bottom of the levels, and it comes in at an energy level of 20. It produces neurosis. It's destructive to psychological and mental health. As a consequence of low self-esteem, it makes one prone to the development of physical illnesses. Shame is used as a tool of cruelty, and the victims often become cruel themselves, as we talk about in the victim-victimizer cycle, which is at the bottom of that circle 8, and it's a never-ending cycle unless you go to victor. And I'll have a link to the episode that describes the victim-victimizer cycle in the show notes or the description. This often leads the person in shame to feel justified for their cruelty. It produces false pride, anger, and guilt. And we're going to talk more about pride, anger, and guilt in the upcoming levels. Guilt is the next level, and it's an energy level of 30. Guilt domination is a preoccupation with sin, and I put the word sin in air quotes. Religious demagogues who use guilt to control whoever they're trying to dominate. Those in this level are obsessed with punishment and are likely acting out their own guilt or projecting it on to others. The next level is apathy, and it's an energy level of 40. Poverty, despair, and hopelessness are in these levels. The world in the future looks bleak, and the state of helplessness, needy in every way, lack not only resources, but they also lack energy. Grief is the next level, and it's an energy level of 75. You see sadness, loss, and despondency here. Most humans have felt this at some point in their life. And I talk about this all the time when it comes to the word toxic positivity and the stages of grief. Chronic mourning and bereavement and remorse about the past. One sees sadness everywhere. Sadness of little children, sadness of world conditions, sadness of life itself, and it colors one's entire vision of existence. Fear is the next level, and it's an energy level of 100. Fear is rampant, and fear of danger is actually healthy. But fear runs most of the world, spurring on an endless act. Then he lists the fears. There's fear of enemies, fear of old age or death, fear of rejection, and a multitude of social fears that dominate most people's lives, as you see in the world today. Once fear becomes one's focus, the endless fearful events feed it. Fear becomes obsessive and can take any form. Fear of loss of a relationship can lead to jealousy and a chronically high stress level. Fear is contagious and can become a dominant social trend. It takes energy to rise above fear. The oppressed are unable to reach a higher level unaided. Thus, the fearful seek a leader who escaped the fear to lead them out of their so-called slavery. Where is your power? The next level is desire, and it has an energy level of 125. Desire motivates vast areas of human activity, including the economy. Desire is the level of addiction and creates a craving more important than life itself. Remember the habit loop and the craving that we talked about in building habits? This is why an addictive habit can be so difficult to get out of, and even why it can lead to death. Desire can lead to accumulation and greed, and it becomes insatiable because it is an ongoing energy field and leads to more and more and more. And the victims of desire may actually be unaware of the basis of their motives. Anger is at an energy level of 150. Anger can lead to constructive or destructive action. As people move out of apathy and grief to overcome fear, they begin to desire and want. Desire leads to frustration, but anger can be a fulcrum into which the oppressed eventually become free. But anger is still in force. Anger can lead to resentment and revenge, and it's volatile and very dangerous. Frustration results from exaggerated importance of desires, and anger can lead to hatred, which is erosive effect on all areas of a person's life. The next level of force is pride, and it's got an energy level of 175. You've heard the saying, pride goeth before the fall. Pride is defensive and vulnerable. It is dependent on external conditions. And pride remains weak because it can be knocked off its pedestal. Pride is divisive and gives rise to factionalism. The consequences are costly. Man has habitually died for pride. Arrogance and denial are in pride, and they block growth. Pride is a sizable block to real power. Now we go into power levels. Remember, power is constructive and it gives you your power back. Courage comes in first with an energy level of 200. This is where power first appears. It distinguishes the positive and negative influences of life. At the level of courage, attainment of true power occurs. You become empowered. Zone of exploration, accomplishment, fortitude, and determination all remain in courage. When you are encouraged, people put back as much energy as they take. Accomplishments result in positive feedback. Neutrality is the energy level of 250. You rise above barriers that dissolve one's energies. Become flexible and non-judgmental. Realistic appraisal of problems. You become unattached to outcomes. Not getting one's way is no longer experienced as defeating, frightening, or frustrating. So I joined Toastmasters in January of 2020. And when I did, the pandemic hit shortly thereafter. And I had just given a speech on reality transurfing talking about advantage, pendulums, and outer intention, and keeping everything away from fear. Because I understood these concepts and I understood how fear was not helpful. Well, we had an education director who sent an email to the entire Toastmasters group the very next day after my speech, where they talked about, she put in, it had all of these statistics about the millions of people that were going to die of COVID and all of these things. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. And it just went on and on and on. And it was so fearful. That stuff I don't like to let into my world. And I was kind of angry because it was forced upon me in the email. And I'm like, did y'all not listen to my speech yesterday? And yeah, probably not, because I had just joined. I had no mentorship, no guiding in the Toastmasters. And actually, this is why I left Toastmasters. But my speech was terrible. And so my impact was not there. But I was frustrated because this person had forced fear upon me. And I knew that neutrality was a much better place to come from. The beginning of inner confidence, sensing one's own inner power, and they're not easily intimidated when they're in neutrality. One is not driven to prove anything. That's an advantage in reality transurfing. My world is always taking care of me, and you're not driven to prove your point. I was driven at that time, but I let it go. People in neutrality are safe to be around. They're not interested in conflict, competition, or guilt. They're comfortable and basically undisturbed emotionally. So this is pretty much me in a nutshell. I'm not interested in conflict. I'm not interested in competition. And I know what guilt does to you. I mean, remember, it's in the lower levels of force. I know what guilt will do to you. And so I went through many, many years of a court battle with my ex. My complex post-traumatic stress disorder comes from courts and things like that, in court battles. And I was just overwhelmed with all the stuff he would throw at me through the court system, because he could bully me through the court system. But in 2007, which is shortly after I read this book and shortly after I began my awakening, I finally gave up and I just said whatever and let it go. And it felt great. I became neutral. I was not interested in conflict. I was not interested in competing with him or his wife to be the mother. And I was not interested, definitely not interested in guilt. I let go of a lot of guilt that I had been holding on to. Guilt is a very low energy vibration, as we just talked. And I did an episode on guilt from reality transurfing perspective, and I highly recommend you listen to that. It is in the show notes and the description. Willingness comes in next, and it's got an energy level of 310. Positive energy may be seen as the gateway to the higher levels, or as flow. So flow is where challenge meets skill. And then that's positive energy. When you are in flow, you're in the zone and you have the gateway to higher levels, which we will be talking about in a moment. They have overcome inner resistance to life. They're open-minded. Below level 200, they're more closed-minded. So we're talking growth mindset starts to enter here. A growth mindset will help you find power. You overcome inner resistance to life. Those in this power level are genuinely friendly, social, and economic success tend to follow. Not troubled by unemployment and will find a way. Entrepreneurs reside here tremendously, especially if you stick to the entrepreneur journey, because they are willing and they don't see things as brick walls. They're naturally helpful to others and they contribute to the good of society. They are willing to face inner issues and do not have major learning blocks. So I have on here a little note to tell a story about cleaning stairs at my work. So during the pandemic, the place I work is basically a healthcare place, and they became obsessed with keeping everything clean. Everything had to be kept clean. I went from being a personal trainer in the gym to helping out in operations wherever they needed me. And that meant cleaning everything. We cleaned walls, we cleaned tables, we cleaned pens and pencils, and anything that got touched, we cleaned. We cleaned doorknobs, we cleaned doors. And honestly, the company was keeping everybody safe. That was a good thing. But I had to face my inner issues and not let everything take over. Oh, I can't do this. I'm a personal trainer. No, you can't. You have to shift from that. You have to be naturally helpful and contribute to the good of the company. And so I was cleaning, there was 4 stairwells in the building and we cleaned the stairs every day. And that was my job. I volunteered to do that because actually, since the gyms were closed, that turned out to be my workout. And I used that to my advantage. I put my headphones on, I listened to podcasts, I learned a lot of new things while I still was contributing to the good of the company. People in willingness bounce back from adversity and learn from experience. They tend to be self-correcting, willing to look at own defeats and learn from others. Acceptance is the next energy level, and it comes in at a level of 350. Major transformation takes place here. I started this episode telling you that I didn't like the term toxic positivity because there's no transformation that takes place here. So when we're talking acceptance, major transformation takes place. Responsibility is a key right here. And I know if you've listened to any of my episodes, I talk about responsibility often. For when you take responsibility, everything shifts. You don't see positivity as toxic because you know that you're responsible for how you see the world. And when you call it positivity toxic, you're taking away your power. And acceptance is the final level in the stages of grief. Once you get to acceptance, you can overcome grief. And the girl that I call toxic positivity girl, during the pandemic, she was so depressed and so upset. And I'm thinking to myself, you have it made. You have so many things going for you, and you're wanting to sit around and complain instead of looking at acceptance, where you would transform the way you look at the world instead of looking at it in victim mentality. And all levels below 200 tend to be powerless, and they see themselves as victims at the mercy of life. So when you're seeing yourself as a victim and you're sitting there calling positivity toxic, or you're at the mercy of what's happening in life, you're stuck there. And you're going to stay stuck there until you take responsibility for what's going on in your world. Nothing so-called out there has the power to make one happy. Love is not something that is taken away, but is created within. So I have a friend that was so upset about the guy she was dating. She said, I guess my picker is broken. And we've all been there, where we think that maybe something's wrong with me and I'm picking the wrong person. But nothing so-called out there has the power to make one happy. Love is not something that is taken away, but it's created within. And when you know that, you're taking responsibility and you're in acceptance. So you don't blame your picker being broken. Stop giving your power away. Emotional calm and perception is widened here, and denial is transcended. Lower levels are very rigid, but acceptance is free of discrimination and intolerance, and includes rather than rejects others. So the girl I called Toxic Positivity Girl, I'll put a link in the show notes to her if you really want to look her up. But even to this day, she still is very rigid on her beliefs. Is she correct? Probably. Yes, but she's so rigid that she has no tolerance for anything. Like right now, she's calling out the guy from 75 Hard and saying how bad that is and how it's not right. Is she correct? Probably, but I do know some people who have benefited from that workout. So I'm not going to go and say 75 Hard is bad, even though the guy that created it he's probably a slime ball, but it's not my place to say anything. And really and truly, it's not her place either, but she feels like it is. She would rather be right than kind. So when the race situation took place, she came after me because she put on her page, anger never solved anything. Well, me being the person who's read all this and understands that anger is in the lower levels and it's very rigid, that anger never solved anything. And she said, you're not listening. You're not paying attention. And she chewed me out for calling her out, which I never did again, because she has to be right. She has to be correct in her mind. And she's very rigid. Because I told her I was listening to people like Abraham Hicks, and she goes, you're just blinded by the light. Well, Abraham Hicks is a spiritual entity. It's not light, it's not dark, it's not whatever. And she forced me to say, yeah, you're right, I'm blinded by the light. But I would much rather be there than be going, oh my gosh, accusing somebody of being wrong and being rigid and discriminating and not tolerating other ideas. And that's exactly what she does. And so when you do that, you give your power away. And I just said, you're right, I'm blinded by the light, which to this day still cracks me up. So the next level we're going to talk about is reason, and its energy level of 400. Reason is capable of handling large, complex amounts of data and make rapid, correct decisions. The level of science and medicine is in this level. And I do believe reality transurfing is also at this level, the book Reality Transurfing, as well as Vadim Zeland. He is a quantum physicist, and some of his ideas are very full of this reasoning. Hawkins even says the great books of the Western world calibrate here. Oh my goodness. And that's where I think that reality transurfing calibrates, because in a moment, I'm going to talk about a couple of books that calibrate higher than this, and you'll understand why. What happens is they can lose sight of the forest for the trees, and reason disregards context and discernment for the critical point of a complex issue. For example, Vadim has written an awesome book, yet he wants to blacklist people from discussing the book. I mean, he blacklisted Aaron Doughty, and then he blacklisted Renee, and he wants to trademark the term reality transurfing. I get that. But what I don't get is why he doesn't encourage others to teach this book. I learned about this book from Aaron Doughty. And then next thing I know, he's blacklisting him. I listened to Owen Hunt read the book, who's very, very good at that. And then he blacklisted him, and he turned it off from the internet and wouldn't let people talk about it. Probably the reason he doesn't come after me is because I'm little and I'm a personal trainer and I talk more about it, but I'm obsessed with the book. It's really, really good, and it's very good. But you don't hear people like Eckhart Tolle going, oh, you can't discuss my topic, my books. I'm going to blacklist you. Because here's the thing. Eckhart Tolle vibrates, I promise you, at a much higher level. I would say he's close to enlightened, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. And David Hawkins says in the book, he goes, transcending this level is relatively uncommon, only for 4% of the world's population. And I think in 2007, absolutely that was correct. But as we start to evolve more and more people become aware of this, I think it is quite possible that it's more than 4% of the population at this time. So love is an energy level of 500. And love is not really what the world sees as love, which is based on desire or the lower levels and leads to possessiveness, control, addiction, eroticism, and novelty. Often reveals an underlying anger and dependency that it had masked, or attachment. There probably never was love in such a relationship, rather infatuation. And so I did a video on this. My therapist had a theory about love and infatuation. So infatuation goes straight up the curve on the timeline. You immediately become infatuated with somebody. But real love, the kind of love that this is vibrating at, it takes time. You have to experience the other person's shadow, which we all have shadows, and see what you're actually tolerant of. So once that starts happening, you start to see the red flags. And somebody thought they were in love, but actually they were infatuated, which led to possessiveness and control and addiction to that person, and thinking, oh my gosh, my picker's broken because I always pick guys like this. And that's not truly the case. They just haven't given enough time to really let true love sink in and understand that everybody has a shadow, and what does your shadow tolerate? What does the other person's shadow tolerate? And that's true love. And I'll have a link to that video in the show notes as well as in the description. True love is unconditional, unchanging, and permanent. It's God, the universe, whatever you call it. Some people are turned off by the word God. But right now, Joseph Rodriguez is talking about Neville Goddard and thinking on love and keeping it. It's unconditional, it's unchanging, and it's permanent. So what I mean by when you see the shadows of the other person, You accept them unconditionally. It doesn't ever change. Real love, unlike infatuation, is permanent and it never changes. Love is a state of being relating to the world that is forgiving, nurturing, and supportive. Go back to toxic positivity girl. Was she forgiving? Was she nurturing? Was she supportive? Even to this day, no, she's always mean and hateful and so very strong in her opinions, which, don't get me wrong, she's probably right, but there's no kindness there. She'd rather be right than be kind. This has the capacity to lift others up and accomplish great feats because of its purity of motive. Back to toxic positivity. What would happen if she incorporated love and kindness in her messages instead of force? You see the difference? That's where the power lies. She would be able to impact more and really come across in a much more positive fashion than to sit there and complain. Joy is an energy level of 540. This is not the sudden joy of a pleasurable turn of events. It is a constant accomplishment to all activities. Joy arises from within each moment of existence rather than from any external source. Everything happens effortlessly by synchronicity, and the world and everything in it is seen to be an expression of love and divinity. One sense of responsibility for others at this level is a different quality. There is a desire to use one state of consciousness for the benefit of life itself rather than for particular individuals. This capacity to love many people simultaneously is accompanied by the discovery that the more one loves, the more one can love. Near-death experiences characteristically transformative in their effect. So that means the near-death experience is transformative and in its effect. So the book Embraced by the Light was written by Betty Eadie, and I read it back in the early 90s, maybe the late 80s, and he mentioned the book in Power versus Force, and the book calibrates at a level of 595. Embraced by the Light talks about her afterlife experience and what happened to her while she was there and what happened when she came back, and it was transformative in its effect, what that means. And the book does calibrate at a level of 595. And 595 is very close to the next level we're going to talk about, which is peace. And it's an energy level of 600. Transcendence, real self-realization, God consciousness. It's extremely rare. It comes across in saints like Mother Teresa. Formal religion is transcended to be replaced with pure spirituality, out of which all religion originates. There's infinite silence in the mind, which has stopped conceptualizing. And here's enlightenment. It's an energy level of 700 to 1000. You no longer experience individual personal self as separate from others, and it transcends the ego. The great avatars for whom the title Lord is appropriate, like Lord Krishna, Lord Buddha, and Lord Jesus Christ, are the ones who are in the level of enlightenment. So in review, let's talk about how reality transurfing relates to this, and of course, stop the mind screw. Reality transurfing and power versus force. We talked about guilt on episode number 17. Reality transurfing talks about guilt a lot. And I like the way he approaches guilt because he talks about how whenever you apologize for something, apologize for it once and be done with it. Let it go. Guilt is unforgiveness of self. And when you forgive yourself, you find power there. Anger is at a level of 150. And we see a lot of importance in anger and pride. And importance in reality transurfing, you want to start to drop importance, not drop it completely, not eliminate it, not completely become unattached to everything. But when you stop making things so important that you have to be right, you won't be knocked off your pedestal because there won't be one to knock you off of. As we talked about in pride at level 175. You run the risk of getting knocked off the pedestal, but don't tell a person at pride that, because they will sit there and fight you till the bitter end. But if you know it, you know it. It kind of cracks me up. Neutrality, you move into power. That is when we start moving into power and finding advantage in everything. And remember, courage is right where power starts. And somebody mentioned, I think I heard Aaron Dowdy talking about this one time, how courage, alcohol calibrates at a level of 200. And it's called liquid courage for a reason, because you find courage in that level. Reason is a level 400. And I believe reality transurfing calibrates at a level of 400 because Vadim reasons he reasons his way into blacklisting others from teaching his book and topic. And stop the mind screw. What does it have to do with the levels of consciousness? And my therapist, Sherry Davis, came up with the theory of victimizer, and it's at a level of grief, the grief level of 75, calibrates at 75. Now, we as humans are going to experience grief, and if you think you're not, you're becoming entitled and definitely not taking responsibility for your life. So when we go through the stages of grief, we hit denial, we hit anger, we hit bargaining, depression, acceptance. Once we move into acceptance, we move into neutrality. But you can accept the fact that you're going to go through the stages of grief when we lose something very special to us, and work through that. No one of us is too good for that. No one of us is too good for grief. It's going to happen. But when you take responsibility for it, it shifts it. And you already start to move into acceptance and neutrality when you know this. But there's no escaping going through the stages of grief. I like willingness and how it teaches flow, because flow is the whole concept of getting in to stop the mind screw. Stop mind screwing yourself out of life in general, out of flow. Once you get into flow, you have left the mind screw. And flow is where challenge meets skill, and it's the gateway to the higher levels of consciousness. And just by listening this far to this episode, you already understand these levels, and you've probably felt them all, and you realize where your power is. And when you realize where your power is, it shifts everything. And acceptance is level 350, responsibility for everything in one's life. As I said, if you made it this far in this episode, you totally understand, or you have a concept now to pull from to understand the levels of power and force. And when you're in force, how you're giving your power away, but find the power in every situation that you can. And when you do, it will transform your life. And when you understand that, you get into the higher levels and you find your power, and it's a lot more beneficial than just being right and putting force in everything. All right, that's my episode for today. I hope you liked it. If you know somebody who can benefit from this, please share it with them. And Until next time, I'll see you next time. Peace out and namaste.